Sir, I'm going to need you to step back behind the barrier. This area is for credentialed personnel only. On Veterans Day at Andrews Air Force Base, a quietly dressed single father named Marcus Hale is pushed off the flight line by a by-the-book security captain who sees only a man without credentials. What she doesn't see, what almost no one sees, is the sealed file, the classified mission, and the reason a 4-star general would stop his entire motorcade to call that man by name. But before the truth comes out, someone powerful has been working to make sure it never does. And the woman who gave the order to remove him will have to decide whether following the rules was ever the same thing as doing what was right. The man who didn't fight back. The morning came in clean and cold, the way November mornings do at Andrews Air Force Base. The kind of cold that doesn't argue with you, just settles into your collar and stays there. Captain Diana Reyes had been on the flight line since 5:45, which was earlier than her orders required, and exactly on time by her own internal clock, the one that had been running 15 minutes fast since her first week of basic training and had never once been adjusted. She walked the perimeter in her dress uniform heels, clicking a steady count against the tarmac, clipboard in hand, radio on her left shoulder, and the particular expression on her face that her team called the captain's game face. Not a frown, not a smile, just an absolute certainty that things would go according to plan, because she would personally ensure that they did. Veterans Day at Andrews was one of the larger public access events on the base calendar. Families came, civilians came, politicians came, with their handshakes and their carefully rehearsed expressions of gratitude. General Harold Vance was scheduled to arrive at 1300 hours for the official ceremony, which meant Diana had approximately 4 hours to ensure that every credentialed attendee was in their designated zone. Every unauthorized individual was redirected to the civilian viewing area beyond the north fence, and every possible variable had been accounted for, labeled, and filed. She had done this before. She was good at it. She was, by the formal assessment of 3 consecutive commanding officers, the best event security officer the base had seen in a decade, and she carried that assessment the way other people carry photographs of their children, close, private, and more necessary than she would ever admit out loud. Captain, Sergeant First Class Dominic Pratt, fell into step beside her at the East Gate checkpoint, his breath making small clouds in the morning air. We've got a situation developing at Marker 7. Diana did not break stride. Define situation. Civilian male, mid-30s, has a kid with him. He came through the general public entrance with a standard day pass, which is fine, but he's moved up to the barrier at the flight line edge. The barrier is clearly marked restricted. Henderson asked him twice to step back, and he hasn't. Has he been aggressive? No, ma'am. That's actually... Pratt paused in a way that Diana noticed. That's actually what Henderson flagged it as unusual. He just sort of stood there, quiet. Didn't argue, didn't move, didn't explain himself. Diana changed direction toward Marker 7 without breaking her pace. Where's the child? Holding his hand. Little girl, maybe 6 or 7. The flight line stretched out to her left as she walked a long gray ribbon of tarmac bordered by a row of parked aircraft. 2 F-35s, a C-17 that had been polished for the occasion until it caught the weak November sun and held it like a mirror. The barrier at Marker 7 was a simple retractable belt stanchion, the kind that communicates authority through implication rather than physical force, backed by a placard that read, "Restricted area, credentialed personnel only," in red letters on white. Standing approximately 2 feet on the wrong side of that placard was a man in a gray Henley, dark jeans, and work boots that had seen weather. He was not particularly tall. He was not particularly imposing. He had the lean, unhurried build of someone who had once been in excellent physical condition and had maintained it afterward, not out of vanity, but simply because letting it go had never occurred to him. His hair was cut close, and he had a few days of stubble that had not been planned and did not bother him. In his right hand was the hand of a small girl in a yellow coat who was staring at the F-35s with her mouth slightly open and both eyes wide, the way children look at things that are exactly as magnificent as they expected. Private First Class Henderson was standing 6 feet away from the man with the expression of someone who had been given a task that seemed simple and had turned out to be complicated in a way he couldn't quite articulate. Diana walked up to the man, positioned herself so that she was in his direct line of sight, and spoke in the measured, courteous, absolutely non-negotiable tone she used for these situations. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back behind the barrier. This area is for credentialed personnel only." The man looked at her. His eyes were a dark brown that was almost black in the flat morning light, and they did not carry surprise or irritation or any of the usual responses she received from people in this situation. He looked at her the way someone looks at a thing they have already understood and made peace with. Then he looked back at the aircraft for exactly 2 seconds, not defiantly, not longingly, just with a kind of quiet finality, as if he were saying a brief, private goodbye to something. And then he looked down at the girl. "Come on, Lilybird," he said. His voice was low and even, with the faint, coastal flatness of someone who had grown up in the mid-Atlantic region and spent enough time in other places that the accent had worn smooth. "Let's find a spot at the fence." The girl turned to look at the aircraft one more time, memorizing it, and then turned back to her father. "But Daddy, we couldn't see the numbers on the tail from the fence." "We'll bring the binoculars next year," he said. Diana watched him take his daughter's hand and step back behind the barrier without being asked a second time. He didn't look at Diana again. He didn't look at Henderson. He didn't say anything to the other people nearby who had watched the exchange with the mild interest of bystanders at a minor public inconvenience. He simply turned and began walking his daughter toward the civilian viewing area along the north fence, his hand steady around hers, his pace unhurried, his back straight in the way that is not performed but built, the kind of posture that comes from years of having it required. Diana stood there for a moment after he left. The thing that stayed with her was not the situation had been resolved in under 2 minutes, which was excellent by any metric. The thing that stayed with her was the way he had looked at the aircraft. She had removed hundreds of people from restricted areas over the course of her career, and they responded in one of a small number of predictable ways: irritation, argument, embarrassment, apology, occasional belligerence. Not one of them had looked at what they were being asked to leave with that particular kind of quiet, as though the place itself were something they recognized from the inside. "He had a day pass," Henderson said, slightly defensive, as if Diana had questioned his judgment. "I know that technically grants him general access, but the barrier is—" "You did the right thing," Diana said. "The barrier is clear." She made a notation on her clipboard. "Keep an eye on him. Not because he's a threat. Just keep an eye." Henderson nodded, and Diana turned back to the flight line, resuming her count. She did not know his name yet. That would change in approximately 4 hours. The civilian viewing area along the north fence was equipped with folding chairs, a portable PA system that was already running a playlist of patriotic music at a volume that was respectful rather than festive, and a row of small American flags on wooden sticks that had been placed at even intervals along the fence by someone who had taken the measurement seriously. Marcus Hale found 2 empty chairs near the left end of the row, sat down and positioned Lily in the chair to his right, so that her sight line to the distant aircraft was as clear as possible. Lily pressed her face against the chain link and squinted. "I can see one of them," she said. "The pointy one." "That's an F-35, Marcus said. "Lightning II. "Is it fast?" "It's fast." "Faster than a bird." "Much faster than a bird." Lily considered this with the gravity of a 7-year-old confronting a fact that requires significant mental restructuring. Faster than a really fast bird. Lilybird, it goes Mach 1.6 at altitude. The fastest bird in the world tops out at around 240 miles per hour in a dive. The F-35 at full military power is doing roughly 1,200. Lily processed this. So if the bird raced the airplane, the bird would lose by a significant margin. That's kind of sad for the bird. "The bird doesn't know it's racing," Marcus said, "so it's probably fine." She leaned back in her chair and looked at her father with an expression that was assessing and fond in equal measure. She had her mother's eyes, gray, green, clear, the kind of eyes that read a room the way some people read a clock, quickly and accurately. But she had his stillness, which was not the stillness of passivity, but the stillness of a person who has learned that most things worth understanding require you to stop talking first. "That lady was mean," Lily said. "She was doing her job," Marcus said. "She didn't have to be mean about it." "She wasn't mean, she was direct." Marcus looked out toward the flight line where the distant figures of ground crew were moving in the practiced patterns of pre-event preparation. "There's a difference. Mean is when someone wants you to feel bad. Direct is when someone has a job to do and they do it without a lot of decoration." Lily thought about this. "Which one did she do?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "She was direct," he said again, but he said it a half-second slower than the first time, and Lily noticed and filed it. At 11:20, Colonel Weston Breyer walked the perimeter of the event space with the unhurried authority of a man who owned the room he was in, which, in this case, was not a room, but 400,000 square feet of federal airbase. He was in his dress blues, with every ribbon in its proper place, and his silver hair cut to regulations. And he moved through clusters of staff and visiting officers with the ease of someone who had spent 30 years learning how to be the largest presence in any given space. He shook hands. He nodded at the right moments. He laughed once briefly at something a junior aide said, and the laugh was perfectly calibrated, warm enough to encourage, brief enough to maintain authority. It was during his second perimeter walk at the eastern edge of the civilian viewing area that he saw the man in the gray Henley. He saw him from 40 feet away, and he stopped walking. It was not a dramatic stop. He did not freeze or recoil. It was the controlled, minimal stop of a man who has trained himself to register surprise without showing it, which is a different skill from not feeling it. He stood still for perhaps 3 seconds, looking at the back of Marcus Hale's head, as Marcus sat with his daughter and watched the distant aircraft through the fence. Then Colonel Weston Breyer looked away, turned 45 degrees, and resumed his walk in a direction that took him around the eastern perimeter without passing through the civilian viewing area. He took out his phone and sent a single text. Then he put the phone back in his pocket, straightened the front of his jacket, and continued his perimeter walk with the same smooth, unhurried authority as before. Diana did 3 more perimeter checks before noon, and on the third one, she found herself passing the civilian viewing area at the north fence. She told herself it was because the north fence was on her route. She told herself this in a way that suggested she was aware it needed to be told. The man in the gray Henley was still there. He'd bought Lily a hot chocolate from the vendor cart at the corner of the viewing area and was holding it for her while she pressed back against the fence to watch a ground crew tractor move across the far edge of the tarmac. He was not looking at the tractor. He was looking at the aircraft, just looking with that same quiet that Diana had noticed at the barrier and had not been able to file away properly. She slowed her pace by approximately 4 steps worth before catching herself and resuming normal speed. She had removed him from the restricted area. The situation had been resolved. Whatever that quiet meant, it was not her professional concern. She walked on, but she took out her radio and said quietly, "Pratt, when that civilian mail from Marker 7 came through the public entrance this morning, did you get a name?" Static, then Pratt's voice. "Henderson logged the day pass. It would have required a standard ID scan. Want me to pull it?" Diana thought about it for exactly the amount of time it took her to walk from the viewing area gate to the corner of the east tarmac, which was about 30 seconds. "Yes," she said. The name that came back was M. Hale. Diana looked at it on her tablet screen with the faint, specific frown she used for things that were not wrong, but were not quite right either. M. Hale was a common enough name. The day pass scan had produced a driver's license, which was the standard form of ID for a civilian day visitor, and the license was valid, and the photograph matched the man at the fence, and everything about it was entirely in order, except that when she ran the name through the base personnel database as standard procedure, she got a result she hadn't expected. There was a file. It was not a civilian file. It was a military file, which meant M. Hale was not simply a civilian day visitor with a common name. It also meant that this particular M. Hale had a service record. The file was accessible at her clearance level up to a point she could see the name in full, which was Marcus James Hale. Date of birth placing him at 36 years old. Branch, United States Air Force. Entry date, 11 years ago. She could see the rank at separation, Lieutenant Colonel. She could see the date of separation, which was 14 months ago. And then she hit the wall. The operational record, which should have contained the full service history, was marked with a classification level that stopped her clearance cold. She stared at the screen. A Lieutenant Colonel. 14 months separated. Operational record classified above her access level. She thought about the way he had looked at the aircraft. She thought about the way he had said, "We'll bring binoculars next year." Not angry, not wounded, just steady. The way someone is steady when they've practiced it so long, it's become structural. She thought about Lily pressing her face to the chain link and saying, "The pointy one." Diana closed the file and pulled up Breyer's extension. The call connected on the second ring. "Reyes," Breyer said by way of greeting, which was typical of him. He used last names, the way some people use punctuation to establish that the conversation was his to control. "Colonel, I ran a standard background pull on the civilian I redirected from the flight line restriction at Marker 7. The database returned a military record. Lieutenant Colonel USAF, separated 14 months ago. The operational file is above my clearance level. I wanted to flag it in case there's a VIP status I wasn't briefed on." There was a pause. Short, but there. "What's the name?" "Marcus Hale, sir." Another pause. Shorter this time. Tighter. "That's not a VIP, Captain. That's a retired officer using a standard day pass to attend a public event, same as any civilian. His operational file being classified doesn't change his access status today. He's entitled to the civilian viewing area and nothing further." "Is there a security concern beyond the access boundary issue you already resolved?" Diana looked at her tablet. "No, sir." "Then close it out and stay focused on the General's arrival. 1300 is 2 hours away, and I want every zone locked before noon." "Understood, sir." She paused. One beat. "For my records, is there any reason this individual would have legitimate interest in accessing the flight line beyond the public boundary? Prior connection to the base, an invitation I wasn't copied on, anything in that line?" The pause this time was the kind that has weight. "No," Breyer said. "There is no invitation and no prior connection relevant to today. Treat him as general public." "That's an order, Captain." "Clear." "Clear, sir." She ended the call. She sat with the tablet in her hands for a moment, looking at the name on the screen. Marcus James Hale, Lieutenant Colonel. Separated 14 months ago. Classified operational record. She thought about Breyer's pauses. She was good at reading pauses. She had learned in the field that a pause tells you more than words do, because words can be prepared, but pauses happen in real time. She closed the file. She filed away what she had noticed about those pauses and a part of her mind that was not currently on duty, labeled it, and went back to work. But she left the file open in a background tab. At 12:15, Marcus bought Lily a second hot chocolate, and then refused to buy her a third on the grounds that she had already consumed enough sugar to, in his words, power a small turbine. Lily argued the counterpoint with considerable logic, pointing out that she was cold, and hot chocolate was warm, and warmth was a medical need, and therefore could not be classified as a luxury purchase. Marcus listened to the full argument, nodded at several points to indicate he was following, and then said no again. "You always do that," Lily said. She was not actually upset. It was more of an observation. "Do what?" "Listen like you're going to change your mind, and then not change your mind?" Marcus looked at her. "When have I changed my mind in this family?" Lily put one finger up. "You said I couldn't have a dog. We live in an apartment." "And then I asked again." "Many times." "And you changed your mind." "I'm reconsidering the dog situation," Marcus said carefully. "That is different from changing my mind." Lily held up a second finger. You said I was too young to watch the space documentary. You were 5. I watched it. He paused. I made an error of judgment, and I corrected it. Lily's third finger went up. You said that lady was just being direct. Marcus looked at her. I stand by that. Your face said something different. He was quiet for a moment, in the way he got quiet when she had said something accurate. Lily had learned to distinguish between his silences the way a pilot learns to read weather. There was the silence that meant he was thinking, the silence that meant he was processing something difficult, and the silence that meant she'd landed on something true and he was deciding whether to confirm it. This was the third kind. She was doing her job, Marcus said finally, and doing your job the right way and doing your job with kindness are not mutually exclusive. That's a thing worth knowing. Lily lowered her fingers and looked back at the fence. Will we see the general today? Probably not this close. Did you ever meet a general? The silence that followed was different from all 3 categories she had identified. It was longer, and it had a texture to it like a room you step into and realize has more furniture than you expected. Once or twice, Marcus said. Lily looked at him sideways. Were they nice? Some of them. Was the 4-star one nice? Marcus turned to look at her. What 4-star? The one that's coming today. The PA announcement said he has 4 stars. Is that a lot? That's the highest, Marcus said. 4-star general. There are only about 40 of them in the entire military at any given time. 40? Lily repeated, clearly impressed. Out of how many soldiers? About 1.3 million active duty. Lily did the math with the serious concentration she gave to large numbers. So it's like, she started. Rare, Marcus said. It's very rare. She thought about this. Then, in the way of children who have not yet learned to make their connections quietly, she said, Is that why you flew? Because you wanted to be one of the 40? Marcus was quiet again. But this time, it was the first kind, the thinking kind. No, he said. I flew because there's nothing else in the world like it, and because someone had to. Lily accepted this. She turned back to the fence and pressed her chin against the chain link. Somewhere across the tarmac, a C-17 engine turned over with a sound like distant thunder, and she held her breath for a moment, listening. Marcus watched her, and for a moment his face was not the careful, steady face he wore for the world, but something else, something that had more weather in it, more history. The face of a man who had been somewhere and come back, and was still in the process of figuring out what that meant, and whether the version of himself that had come back was the version he wanted to show his daughter. He put it away before she turned to look at him again. Daddy, Lily said, that man is looking at you. Marcus followed her gaze to the east edge of the viewing area, where an elderly man in a VFW cap was standing with a paper cup of coffee and looking at Marcus with the specific, measured recognition of a soldier who has identified another soldier. He was maybe 70, with the kind of face that the weather had been working on for years, and his eyes were steady and clear. When Marcus met his gaze, the man gave a single, brief nod. Not a wave, not a greeting, a nod. The kind exchanged between people who don't need to explain why. Marcus returned it. Lily looked back and forth between them. Do you know him? No, Marcus said. Then why did you... Some things don't require introduction, he said. She stared at the old man who had already looked away and was drinking his coffee. That's confusing, she said. Most true things are, Marcus said. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, and they sat that way together in the November cold, looking at the aircraft through the fence, and the PA system played America the Beautiful in the middle distance, and the clouds moved in from the west, bringing the threat of something colder. And Marcus Hale sat very still in his gray Henley with his 7-year-old daughter under his arm and did not let himself look at the flight line directly, because some distances are better kept. The name on a sealed file. The hour before General Vance's arrival was the hour Diana liked best at these events, because it was the hour when all the preparation either held or didn't, when the structure she had built out of checklists and clearances and carefully managed contingencies either stood up or showed its cracks. She moved through it the way she always did, efficiently, systematically, and with the low, focused energy of someone who has been running on 2 cups of black coffee and absolute professional commitment since before sunrise. Zone 1 was clear. Zone 2 was clear. The media pool was corralled behind the designated rope line with their cameras and their access badges and their practiced patience. The honor guard was in position. The bass band was warming up at the edge of the tarmac with the quiet, careful attentiveness of musicians who know that this particular performance is not about music. She was crossing the connection point between Zone 2 and Zone 3 when she saw Briar again. He was standing at the far edge of the cordoned VIP area, speaking quietly with a man she recognized as Major Tillman from base administration. The conversation looked routine. Briar was nodding. Tillman was making small hand gestures that indicated logistics. Nothing about the exchange would have caught her attention, except that at the exact moment Diana entered Briar's peripheral line of sight, he turned his body very slightly not toward her, but away, in the smooth, casual repositioning of someone who wants to ensure a certain conversation is not lip-readable from a specific angle. It was a small thing, the kind of small thing that most people would not notice. Diana noticed. She filed it. She kept walking. At 12:40, she crossed the north side of the civilian viewing area again. She had a reason this time. Sergeant Pratt had flagged a man at the far end of the fence who'd been making calls on a phone and displaying the kind of agitated, repetitive movement that security staff learned to track without staring. It turned out to be a father of 4 who had lost his car keys and was calling his wife in the parking lot, and Diana sent Pratt to assist and kept moving. And the route that her feet chose to take back toward Zone 2 happened to pass the left end of the fence row where Marcus Hale and his daughter were sitting. He was not sitting now. He was crouched down to Lily's level, holding the binoculars she had apparently produced from somewhere, a small, worn pair, the kind that have been in a jacket pocket for so long they've taken on the shape of it. And he was pointing at something on the far side of the tarmac, while Lily held the binoculars to her eyes and tracked whatever he was indicating. He was talking to her in a low, continuous voice, and even from 8 feet away, Diana caught a piece of it. The pitot tube, right at the nose. That's what tells the aircraft how fast it's going relative to the air around it. So it's not measuring speed over ground, it's measuring. Lily lowered the binoculars. Like how fast the air is going past you? Exactly like that. Does air feel fast when you're going that fast? You're inside the aircraft. But if you were outside? Marcus thought about this for approximately 1 second. It would feel like everything in the world happening at once, he said. Lily lifted the binoculars again, satisfied. Diana stopped walking. She was not sure why she stopped walking. The professional reason would have been to take a visual on Zone 3 from this vantage point, which was actually a reasonable sightline for the north approach. The honest reason was something else, something that she did not have a professional label for yet, and was not sure she needed one. He looked up then, because he had the peripheral awareness of someone trained to notice when the weight of the space around them shifts, and their eyes met. Diana had the brief, specific discomfort of someone caught in an act that is not wrong, but feels like it should be explained. She straightened and walked over. It was not what she had planned to do. It was what she did. Sir. She kept her voice level, professional, the voice she used when she was managing a situation rather than entering one. I want to confirm that you have everything you need in the civilian area. The restrooms are at the southwest corner, and the vendor cart closes at 12:50. He stood up from his crouch. Standing, he was about 4 inches taller than her. He looked at her with that same unreadable quiet, and then something shifted in it. Not a softening exactly, but an adjustment, the way you adjust a lens to bring something into focus. We're fine, he said. Thank you. Daddy, Lily said, still holding the binoculars to her eyes. The lady from before is back. I know, Marcus said. Is she still being direct? Diana heard this clearly. She watched Marcus Hale close his eyes for exactly half a second in the expression of a parent who has been accurately represented by his child at the worst possible moment. Then he opened them and looked at Diana with an expression that was the closest thing to apologetic she had seen from him. "She's very literal," he said. "I heard that too," Diana said to Lily. Lily lowered the binoculars and looked at Diana with the frank, uncomplicated assessment of a child who has not yet learned to disguise her evaluations. "You have a lot of stuff on your uniform," she said. "Lily," Marcus said. "I'm complimenting her," Lily said, not taking her eyes off Diana. "That's a lot of ribbons. What do they mean?" Diana glanced down at her own chest automatically. "They're service awards for different things I've done in the military." "Did you fly planes?" "No, I'm security." Lily considered this. "Is that why you made my dad step back this morning?" "Lily," Marcus said again, and his voice had a note in it that was not quite a warning, but was adjacent to one. "I'm just asking," Lily said. Diana looked at the girl who was looking back at her with a clear, expectant patience that was unsettling in someone that age. She looked like a person who would wait as long as it took for an honest answer, and would notice the difference between an honest answer and a well-worded one. "Yes," Diana said. "That's part of my job today, making sure people are where they're supposed to be." "Is my dad not supposed to be near the airplanes?" "The flight line is a restricted area. It requires a specific credential." "Oh." Lily turned this over. "Does my dad have a credential?" Marcus said quietly. "Lily Bird?" And something in the way he said it made Lily stop. Not because it was sharp or commanding, it wasn't either of those things. It was something else. It was the voice of a person who has reasons they're not going to explain right now and trusts the person they're talking to understand that there is a right now in the sentence. Lily looked at her father. Then she looked at Diana. Then she said with the careful diplomacy of a child reading a room, "I like your boots." Diana looked down at her own boots, which were regulation and not particularly interesting. "Thank you," she said. She looked back at Marcus. "Enjoy the ceremony," she said. She walked away. Behind her, she heard Lily say, in what she clearly believed was a whisper, "Daddy, I think she wanted to say something else." And she heard Marcus say, "Why do you think that?" And Lily said, "Because she looked at you like she was still deciding." Diana kept walking. Her footsteps were regulation speed, and her clipboard was at the standard carry angle, and her radio was on the correct frequency, and every part of her visible presentation was precisely as it should be. She took out her tablet without slowing down and pulled up the background file on Marcus James Hale again. The classified operational record sat there, inaccessible, like a door in a wall with no handle on her side. She needed a higher clearance to open it. She knew someone who had that clearance. She put the tablet away and kept walking, and she told herself she was going to stop thinking about the man at the fence and focus on the 1300 arrival, which was the actual mission, which was what she was here for. She thought about the classified file for the next 12 minutes without stopping. At 12:55, Colonel Breyer made his approach to the civilian viewing area. He did not come from the direction of the main event space. He came from the east side through a service access gate that put him out near the left end of the fence row, without passing through any of the main security checkpoints. This was not irregular. He had access to all service gates and did not need to check through security. It was simply a route. He walked up to where Marcus and Lily were sitting, with the unhurried ease of a man making a social call, which was one of his social gifts, the ability to make any approach look like it had been planned to be pleasant. "Marcus," he said. Marcus looked up. The thing that happened in his face was not surprise. It was recognition without pleasure, the specific expression of someone who sees something they expected and has already decided how to handle it. "Colonel," Marcus said. Breyer looked at Lily. "This your daughter?" "Yes. Beautiful kid." Breyer smiled at Lily. It was a good smile. He had a good smile, which was part of what made him effective. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," she said. She did not smile back. She had an instinct for people the way some children do the ones who grow up watching the adults around them for safety cues, and the instinct was saying something she couldn't name yet, but was listening to. "Nice to meet you, Lily." Breyer looked back at Marcus. His voice dropped a register, and the smile shifted into something else, still pleasant on the surface, but underneath it, something more deliberate. "Didn't expect to see you here today." "It's a public event," Marcus said. "It is." Breyer glanced at the tarmac beyond the fence. "Big day for the base. General Vance coming in. Lot of history in that. You'd know that better than most, I imagine." Marcus said nothing. "How are you doing these days?" Breyer's tone was the tone of someone asking a question they know the answer to, and are asking anyway. "Heard you back in the area. Settling in okay?" "We're fine," Marcus said. He put his hand on Lily's shoulder without looking at her, just placed it there, a quiet and absolute fact. Breyer looked at the hand on Lily's shoulder, then he looked at Marcus's face. "Glad to hear it," he said. "Enjoy the show from out here, Marcus." A pause, light as a placed bet. "It's a good view." He walked away. Lily waited until he was clearly out of earshot. "Daddy," she said. "I know. He knows your name." "I know. And he doesn't look happy about it." She watched Breyer's retreating back. "Why doesn't he look happy about it?" "Because some people," Marcus said, and his voice was even and low and careful, "are unhappy about things that have nothing to do with you." Lily pressed her mouth together in the way she did when she was saving further questions for later. Then she lifted her binoculars and looked at the aircraft. Marcus watched Breyer until the colonel had disappeared back through the service gate. Then he looked back at the flight line. His expression was still, but his hand on Lily's shoulder held on a half-second longer than usual before he let it go. Diana was in the security coordination station, a temporary setup at the west end of the event space, 2 folding tables with laptop stations and radio equipment, when Pratt found her at 13:05. "Captain, the General's motorcade is 4 minutes out. All zones confirm clear." He paused. "Also, and I wasn't sure whether to bring this up, I just saw Colonel Breyer coming back from the north side of the civilian viewing area through the east service gate." Diana looked up from her screen. "By himself?" "Yes, ma'am. No aide, no security detail. He was out there maybe 5 minutes." Pratt kept his face carefully neutral, which was his way of indicating that he had noticed something and was leaving the interpretation to her. Diana looked at her screen, where the background file on Marcus Hale was still sitting in a background tab. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. Pratt left. Diana looked at the file. Then she picked up her radio and switched to the logistics frequency. "This is Captain Reyes for Major Tillman. Quick query. Base visitor correspondence past 30 days. I need to know if there were any formal access requests received for today's Veterans Day event that were logged but not processed. Specifically, any requests from a retired USAF officer. Name, Marcus Hale, formerly Lieutenant Colonel." She kept her voice level and specific. "Run it through the standard request log and get back to me." She put the radio down. She looked at her watch. 3 minutes to the General's arrival. She picked up her clipboard, put her professional face on like armor, and went to take her position. But she left the radio on. What Lily told her. General Harold Vance's motorcade arrived at 13:07, 2 minutes late by the schedule and exactly on time by the General's own standards, which was that he arrived when the situation required him and not before. Diana watched the 3 black SUVs roll through the main gate from her position at the edge of Zone 1, and she felt the particular specific tension of an event that has been planned down to the minute, finally beginning to move. The honor guard snapped to attention. The bass band began. The small crowd of official attendees in the cordoned VIP area beyond the ceremony markers straightened automatically, the way people straighten in the presence of someone who has earned a certain kind of regard. General Vance stepped out of the center vehicle, and he was a man who looked exactly the way a 4-star general is expected to look. Only if what you expect is a man who has spent 35 years earning something the hard way and is at peace with the cost. He was 61, broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped gray hair and a face that had the specific quality of a thing that has been exposed to a great deal of weather and has not asked for shelter. He moved with an unhurriedness that was not slowness. It was the opposite of slowness. It was the movement of someone to whom all movement has become deliberate. Colonel Breyer was at the vehicle in 14 seconds, hand extended. "General, welcome to Andrews. It's an honor." "Colonel." Vance shook the hand. His eyes were already moving over the space with the systematic thoroughness of a man who has a habit of knowing exactly where he is. "Good event setup. Tight. Captain Reyes runs our event security. She's first rate." Vance nodded, still scanning. "Looking forward to the ceremony. I want a moment with the flight line before we begin. Just a walk. 5 minutes." "Of course, sir. I'll arrange." "Just me," Vance said. "Just the flight line. I don't need an escort for a walk." He moved toward the aircraft. Breyer fell back, which he did gracefully, and resumed his position near the VIP markers. Diana watched the general walk the flight line from her post at Zone 1. He walked slowly and without speaking, and he looked at the aircraft the way Marcus Hale had looked at them through the fence, with the specific inward attention of someone who is not just seeing, but remembering. Her radio crackled. Tillman's voice. "Reyes, I ran that query on the visitor correspondence log. I'm seeing a formal access request dated 3 weeks ago, submitted digitally through the standard Retired Officer Event Access portal. Name matching your query." The request was received by the system and assigned a case number. It was then transferred internally to the office of the base commander for processing. Diana kept her eyes on the general, and her voice very quiet. "And was it processed?" A pause. "It doesn't appear so. There's no response on record. No approval, no denial. The request is showing as received and transferred, and then no further action." Diana said, "Which office is the base commander?" "That would be Colonel Breyer's office, ma'am." She kept her face exactly as it was. "Thank you, Sergeant. Keep that documentation accessible. Do not file it." "Understood." She put the radio down and looked across the space to where Breyer was shaking hands with a cluster of local officials, laughing at something, perfectly at ease. She looked at the flight line where General Vance was walking slowly past an F-35, his hands clasped behind his back. She looked at the north fence, where 200 yards away, the small yellow coat of Lily Hale was just visible through the chain link. She made a decision that was not on her checklist. She crossed the event space to the service gate on the east side, walked through, and came out near the civilian viewing area from the same direction she had seen Breyer use 40 minutes earlier. She told herself she was doing a welfare check on the civilian viewing area population, which was in her authority. She told herself this once, which was one more time than she believed it. Marcus was on his feet when she arrived. He had seen her coming, she had no doubt about that. He had been tracking movement since she'd come out of the service gate, and she knew it from the way his body oriented before she was close enough to have reasonably been noticed. He said nothing, just watched her approach with the same unhurried attention he gave everything. Lily looked up. "She's back again," she said, with the tone of someone reporting a pattern. "I see her," Marcus said. Diana stopped 2 feet from them and was quiet for a moment, because she had come here with a purpose, and now that she was here, the purpose felt less clear-cut than it had from Zone 1. She was not sure what she was going to say. She was rarely not sure what she was going to say. "Your daughter was right this morning," Diana said. "I did want to say something else." Marcus waited. "I found your file," she said. "I can't open it above a certain classification level, but I found enough to know that your record at the USAF was—" She paused, choosing the word with care. "Substantial." "Was it?" he said. It was not a question. "I also made a query into the base visitor correspondence log. I found a formal access request filed through the Retired Officer Event portal 3 weeks ago, for today's event, under your name." Something moved in his face. It was brief, and she almost missed it. "And?" "It was received," she said, "and transferred to the base commander's office, and not processed." He looked at her for a long moment. In the silence, a distant aircraft did a low pass somewhere north of the base, and the sound rolled across the field like a wave. "How long have you known?" she said. Known what? That the request wasn't processed, that it was sitting somewhere it shouldn't have been sitting. He looked at the aircraft instead of her. "I didn't know for certain. I suspected." He was quiet. "When I didn't get a response, approval, or denial, I knew something had been intercepted. I've worked with bureaucracies. Silence means something different than delay." "And you came anyway?" Diana said. "Lily wanted to see the aircraft." "That's not the only reason." He looked back at her then, and his eyes held something she had not seen in them before. Something that had been underneath the quiet the whole time, and was now briefly at the surface. "She needed to see this," he said. "This ceremony, what it means. I could have taken her to a museum, I could have shown her photographs, but she needed to be here, to understand what it actually looks like when people show up for the thing they said they'd show up for." He paused. "And I needed her to see that her father can stand in a place where he used to belong and be all right." Diana looked at him. "Are you?" she said. "All right?" He considered the question the way he considered everything, not rushing past it. "Working on it," he said. Lily had been following this conversation with the careful, quiet attention she brought to things she understood were important, even if she didn't understand all the words. She put her hand into her father's without looking at him, and he took it without looking at her, and it was the kind of small, habitual gesture that tells you everything about how two people have learned to be together. "He used to fly," Lily told Diana. "The really hard kind." Diana looked at her. "What do you mean, the really hard kind?" Lily pressed her lips together, thinking about how to explain it. "He told me once that there are missions where you go out and you know you might not come back, but you go anyway because someone has to. And the pilots who go on those missions are different from regular pilots." She looked at her father with a very serious expression. "Daddy is that kind." Marcus did not look at his daughter. He was looking at the far side of the tarmac. His jaw was set in a way that was controlled but not entirely successful. "Lilybird," he said. "You don't need to." "It's true," she said simply. Diana stood very still. "Used to fly," she said carefully. "What kind of mission specifically?" She was looking at Marcus. He turned back to her. "The kind with sealed records," he said. It was not a deflection. It was a fact offered with complete evenness, like handing someone a document and saying, "Here, this is what I have." "Your operational record is above my access level," Diana said. "Yes." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because some of what I did is still relevant to ongoing operations, and the full record can't be opened until certain timelines expire. Standard protocol." He looked at her directly. "I'm not a ghost, Captain. I'm just classified." Diana looked at him at the worn Henley and the work boots and the binoculars stuffed back into his jacket pocket and the 7-year-old girl holding his hand, and she felt something shift in the way she was seeing him. Not suddenly, but the way a photograph develops. The image that was always there, coming forward through layers of assumption. She had seen what she expected to see, a man without a credential in a restricted area. She had not looked for what was actually there. "I owe you an apology," she said. He shook his head. "You did your job." "I did my job badly," she said. "There's a difference." He looked at her with the beginning of something in his expression that was not quite a smile, but was in that direction, something wry and a little warm. The expression of someone who has not been expecting to be surprised today and finds they have been. "You're very direct," he said. "I was told that's a virtue." "It is," he said, "when it goes both ways." Lily looked between them with the expression of a child cataloging data. "She's reconsidering," Lily told her father. "I can tell." Diana looked at the girl. "Reconsidering what?" Lily considered the question very carefully. "What she thought this morning," she said at last. Diana walked back through the service gate at 13:31, which was 4 minutes into the official ceremony program, which meant she was 2 minutes behind her own personal standard, but still within operational parameters. She walked quickly because the ceremony was underway, and she needed to be visible in Zone 1 during Vance's address. She did not allow herself to process the conversation by the fence for the moment, because processing would require her to sit still, and sitting still was not available right now. What was available was her radio, which was already alive with Pratt's voice confirming Zone 2 clear, and the sound of the bass band from the ceremony space and the distant address amplified over the PA, and underneath all of it, quiet and persistent, the thing Lily had said, "Daddy is that kind." She was in Zone 1, 10 feet from the perimeter of the official ceremony space, when her radio squawked again. Not Pratt this time. Tillman. "Captain Reyes, that documentation you asked me to keep accessible. I want you to know I've pulled the full file, including the internal transfer log. There's a secondary notation in the system. Looks like someone confirmed receipt of the transfer manually from Colonel Breyer's office. Initialed." A pause. The initials match Colonel Breyer's documented signature. Diana stopped walking. She was standing between Zone 1 and Zone 2, with the bass band playing behind her and the crowd noise of the ceremony washing over the space, and General Harold Vance's voice coming through the PA system saying something about service and sacrifice, and the debt that democracies owe to the people who go when they are asked to go. She stood there, and she thought about the pauses in Breyer's voice when she'd called him. She thought about him coming through the East Service Gate to the civilian viewing area by himself. She thought about the way he'd said, "Enjoy the show from out here. Marcus. Light as a bet. Certain as a threat." She thought about a 7-year-old girl pressing her face against chain link to see an aircraft more clearly because her father's formal access request had been sitting in an inbox for 3 weeks. Confirmed, received, and then deliberately buried. Diana Reyes had spent 8 years building a reputation for doing things by the book. The book was not a metaphor for her. It was a genuine commitment, a structure she had built her professional self around, because it was the only structure she trusted, to be fair, to protect people, to make sure that what happened for a documented reason. What Colonel Breyer had done was not the book. What she had done this morning, following an order without asking the one question she should have asked, that had also not been the book. Not really. That had been the part that came before the book, the authority of rank and manner, and the assumption that the person above you has read more than you have. She picked up her radio. "Tillman," she said, "print that documentation, all of it. Keep 2 copies." "Yes, ma'am." She put the radio back and walked into Zone 1. She did not know yet what she was going to do. She knew she was going to do something. The PA carried Vance's voice, and I want to be clear that the debt I'm describing is not abstract. It is specific. It has names on it. Diana walked through Zone 1 and took her position by the ceremony perimeter. She stood there with the documentation request sitting on Tillman's printer and the question of Breyer's initialed notation sitting in her chest, and General Vance's voice filling the cold November air and 400 yards of bass between her and a man in a gray Henley by a fence who had flown the ones that don't come back. She stood very still. She listened. "Sir, he has no credentials, General. He saved my life." General Vance ended his address at 13:54, which was 3 minutes ahead of the program schedule, which was not because he'd cut anything, but because he didn't add anything that didn't need to be there. He shook hands with the ceremony officials, he spoke for 2 minutes with the Honor Guard commander, and then he walked, as he'd indicated he would, back toward the flight line for the second pass he'd requested, the one without the escort. He walked slowly, hands behind his back, the way Diana had seen him walk the first time. He moved with the unhurried attention of a man who is looking at something and really seeing it, not performing the act of looking. He walked the line of aircraft from the F-35s down to the C-17, and he stood for a moment in front of each one with his hands clasped and his expression inward, the way you stand at a grave that belonged to someone who was not sorry to be there. Then he reached the end of the flight line nearest the north fence, and he stopped. Diana was 40 meters away, at her position between Zone 1 and the VIP walkway, and she saw the moment he stopped. She saw his body change, not dramatically, nothing theatrical, just a subtle shift of orientation, as if something in his peripheral field had pulled his focus and then held it. He turned his head toward the north fence. He looked at whatever he was looking at for perhaps 5 seconds, and then he began to walk toward the fence. Diana's radio was in her hand before she was aware of having reached for it. She watched him approach the north fence. She watched him stop at the barrier chain, the same chain that Diana had positioned at 7:30 this morning, the same one she had enforced the restriction from. He stood there and looked through the fence at the civilian viewing area on the other side. Then he turned to the aide who had appeared at his shoulder, despite the stated preference for no escort. "Get me a gate," he said. "Now." Diana was already moving. She reached the east service gate at the same time the aide was unlocking it, and she went through behind Vance and kept her position 2 steps to his left and 4 steps back, which was the correct security position, and also the position from which she had the best sight line to both the general and the civilian area ahead. She did not need to wonder what he had seen through the fence. She knew. She had known on some level, in the way that you know a thing before you let yourself know it, since she'd looked at Marcus Hale's classified file this morning and seen the wall where his operational record should have been. Vance was walking toward the left end of the fence row with the direct, unhesitating movement of someone who does not need to ask directions to something they recognize. He walked past 3 clusters of civilians and a folding chair that had been knocked sideways by a passing child, and he arrived at the spot where Marcus Hale was standing. Because Marcus was standing now, because he had seen Vance coming and had stood not at attention, not in the formal posture of someone performing a role, but in the natural, settled way he did everything, with his feet slightly apart and his hands at his sides and his face still. Lily was beside him. She had taken his hand. "Lieutenant Colonel Hale Vance said." His voice was not loud. He wasn't using ceremony voice. This was the voice he used when he meant what he was saying, which was quiet and direct and had the specific weight of a person who knows the difference between something said for an audience and something said because it is true. Every person within 20 feet went quiet without being asked. Marcus looked at the general. "Sir?" he said. "I heard you were in the area," Vance said. "I didn't know I'd see you today." "We came for the aircraft," Marcus said. He looked down briefly at Lily, who was looking at General Vance with both eyes very wide. "My daughter wanted to see the ceremony." Vance looked at Lily. He looked at her the way a man looks at something that gives him information he needs, and then he looked back at Marcus. "She has your eyes," he said. "She has better eyes than I do," Marcus said. "She doesn't miss anything." Vance made a sound that was brief and genuine. Then the sound went away, and his face went back to what it had been, steady and present, and carrying the specific weight of what he was about to say. "I want to do something," Vance said, "and I'm going to tell you what it is before I do it, because you deserve that." He paused. The operation record from Khost Province, October 14 years ago, was partially declassified last month. I reviewed my personal file on the incident 2 weeks ago, and my aide reached out to the Retired Officer Access portal for today's event on my request. Marcus was very still. "I know," Vance said more quietly, "that you filed your own request separately, and I know it didn't arrive." The general's voice did not change in temperature, but something in it did, a specific hardness that was not anger, but was in the same family as anger. The feeling of a person who has discovered that something they trusted has been used the wrong way. "I'm sorry for that." "It's a bureaucracy," Marcus said. "Things get lost." "Some things don't get lost," Vance said. He looked at Marcus for a moment in a way that had the quality of 2 people who share a room that no one else can enter. "You know what you did out there." "I know what we did," Marcus said. "There were 4 of us. 2 of them have been recognized, publicly, with proper ceremony." Vance paused. "You weren't. Because of circumstances I intend to have a very detailed conversation about today with the base commander. But that's my business and I'll conduct it separately." He straightened. His voice went up one register, not to ceremony volume, but to something that could be heard clearly by the people around them, which at this point was a widening circle because people had been drifting closer in the way of crowds around something that carries weight, drawn not by spectacle, but by the sense that something real is happening. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus James Hale Vance said, "On the 14th of October in Coast Province, you flew a combat extraction mission under hostile fire that should not have been survivable. You lost your wingman's aircraft to a surface-to-AR missile at the ingress point and flew the return leg alone in a damaged aircraft while maintaining radio communication with the rescue team on the ground and talking 3 survivors through a position change that put them in range of secondary extraction." He paused. "My aircrew was in that secondary extraction. My people came home because of what you did that day." The crowd was fully quiet now. Lily's hand tightened in Marcus's. "You did not ask to be recognized," Vance said. "I know that. You submitted a routine retired access request to bring your daughter to see a ceremony, and you were denied that by someone who had reason to want to keep you quiet. And you came anyway in civilian clothes and sat by the fence." He looked at Marcus with an expression that had depth in it. Respect, but more than respect. The specific regard of someone who has been saved and knows it, and has carried that knowledge for 14 years. "I am going to ask your permission to recognize that now, publicly. Because your daughter is standing next to you, and she is old enough to understand what it means, and you are the kind of man who did not ask for this, which is exactly the kind of man who deserves it." The November air was cold and still. Marcus looked at his daughter. Lily was looking up at him with those gray-green eyes, and she was not saying anything, which was unusual enough that it meant everything. She was reading his face the way she had learned to read it for the third kind of silence, the one that meant she had landed on something true. He looked at Vance. "All right," he said. Diana was standing 4 steps behind the general and had not moved during the entirety of this exchange, which was correct from a security standpoint and felt like the most inadequate description of what she was doing that she could have offered. She was standing there with her clipboard and her radio, and 8 years of by-the-book service record and the documentation that Tillman had printed and that she had collected before coming through the service gate, folded once and held flat against the clipboard. She was watching Colonel Weston Breyer. He had appeared at the edge of the civilian viewing area 4 minutes ago, coming from the main event space, and he was standing now at a distance of approximately 30 feet from the general, and his face was doing the controlled, minimal work of a man who has a very great deal to lose and is not yet sure how much of it is gone. When Vance finished speaking, when the applause from the gathered people, not a crowd of thousands, just 60 or 70 who had been pulled close by the gravity of what was happening, rose and then settled, Breyer began moving. He moved toward Vance with the smooth confidence of authority and purpose, the move of a man who is going to step in and redirect a situation. Diana recognized it because she used a version of it herself. She stepped to intercept. "Colonel," she said. Her voice was level. Breyer looked at her. "Captain, the general should be making his way to the VIP departure zone. We're behind the event schedule." "The general is doing what the general has decided to do," Diana said. "Which is within his authority." Breyer looked at her with an expression that was patient and ice underneath the patience. "Reyes, step aside. This isn't your call." Diana looked at him for one moment. She thought about Tillman's voice on the radio. The initials match Colonel Breyer's documented signature. She thought about the folder against her clipboard. She thought about a small girl saying, "Daddy is that kind?" "Sir," she said, "I need to speak with you about a documentation issue in the base visitor correspondence log before you approach the general." Breyer's eyes narrowed by approximately 2 millimeters, which on his face was equivalent to a flinch. "This isn't the time." "I think it is, sir," Diana said. She kept her voice completely even. She was not performing calm. This was what calm actually felt like. The calm of a person who has made a decision and is standing in it. "Because the documentation relates to a formal access request filed through the retired officer portal 3 weeks ago, transferred to your office. Confirmed, received, under your initials, and not acted upon." She paused. "I have 2 copies." The silence between them lasted approximately 4 seconds. Breyer said very quietly, "Be very careful, Captain." "I am being careful, sir," she said. "I've been careful about this since approximately 12:40 today." She held the folder out, not aggressively, simply the way you hand someone something they need to look at. "I'd like you to look at the documentation and tell me whether there's an explanation I'm not aware of." That's the by-the-book approach, and I think we can both agree that's the appropriate standard. Breyer did not take the folder. He looked at her face, and she looked at his, and something passed between them that was not spoken. The mutual acknowledgement of 2 people who now understand exactly what each of them knows, and what each of them is going to do. "This is going to cost you," Breyer said. Quiet. Certain in the way that only people with power over someone else can be certain. "Probably," Diana said. "I'd like you to look at the documentation." Breyer's jaw set. He looked past her to where Vance was crouching down to shake Lily's hand, the general saying something that made the small girl's face break into a wide, delighted grin. He watched that for a moment. Then he reached out and took the folder. She brought it to Vance herself. Not immediately. First, there was the conversation between the general and Marcus, which continued for several minutes, and which Diana stood slightly apart from, close enough to be security, far enough to be respectful. She heard pieces of it, the names of people, the name of a place she didn't recognize but filed away the word "cost" twice. She heard Marcus say, "I should have been clearer in what I filed," which was the closest thing to an acknowledgement that he had tried to do this the right way, and it had not worked. And she heard Vance say, "It was never your responsibility to make sure the system worked correctly, Marcus. The system owed you that." She heard Lily say to the general with complete seriousness that she had read a book about Afghanistan and she had questions, and heard the general say he had time for questions, and she heard Marcus say, "Lilybird, the general has a schedule," and heard Vance say, "Let her ask." When the conversation came to a natural pause, Diana stepped forward. "Sir," she said to Vance, "I need to bring a documentation matter to your attention. It relates to why Lieutenant Colonel Hale was present in the civilian area rather than on the base proper." She looked at Breyer, who had come forward, folder in hand, with the controlled bearing of a man who has decided to front-foot a losing situation rather than run. "Colonel Breyer has reviewed the documentation." Vance looked at Breyer. Breyer said, "There appears to have been a processing error in my office's handling of the visitor request. I take responsibility for the failure to ensure it was handled appropriately." The word "appears," the word "error." Diana said clearly, "The documentation shows the request was received, and the receipt was manually confirmed under the colonel's initials. It was then not processed and not declined. That's not a processing error, sir. That's a choice." She said it directly. She said it in the presence of a 4-star general, a circle of civilians and military staff who had drawn close, and Colonel Weston Breyer. She said it knowing what it would cost. She said it because it was true. Vance looked at the folder. He looked at Diana. He looked at Breyer. "Colonel," he said, "I'm going to need a full account of this, in writing, on my desk by 0800 tomorrow." His voice had not risen. It was, if anything, quieter than before, which on a 4-star general is a more significant indicator than volume. "And I will be initiating a formal review of base command decisions related to this visitor request and the circumstances of Lieutenant Colonel Hale's service separation." He looked at the folder in Breyer's hands. "Give that to my aide." Breyer handed it over. His face was controlled. His face was so controlled that it was the most expressive thing about him. He looked at Diana once, briefly, before he turned and walked away. She did not look away. What she did not know, standing there in the cold November air at the edge of the civilian viewing area, was what the formal review was going to find. She did not know whether the review of Breyer's actions would extend to his role in Marcus's early separation, whether the sealed records would be opened in the course of the inquiry, whether the documentation she had produced today would be sufficient, or whether she would be called to account for accessing records beyond the initial scope of her security assignment. She did not know whether her career was intact, or whether she had just handed someone the argument that she had gone outside her role. She knew what she had done. She knew that it was right. But right and safe are not the same thing, and she had built 8 years on both of them together. And she was now standing on the right side of that equation for the first time in a long time, with the safe side uncertain. And she was surprised to find that she was not in pieces about it, that the feeling was not the falling sensation she had expected, but something more like the moment after you let go of something very heavy and realize your hands still work. General Vance had moved back toward the VIP area with his aide. The circle of civilians had gradually opened and dispersed. The ceremony music had resumed from the distant PA, something instrumental patriotic, without being aggressive. Marcus was standing at the edge of the gate she'd come through, Lily beside him. He was looking at her. She did not know what was on her face. Whatever it was, he looked at it for a long moment and then looked away. Not unkindly, but in the manner of someone giving something space because he knows it needs room. Lily said something to him. He bent down and said something back. She nodded with great seriousness and held his hand. The review would happen, or it wouldn't. The consequences would arrive when they arrived. What Diana was holding right now in the cold air in the aftermath of the thing she had done was the folder copy she'd kept Tillman's second print, the one she'd made sure existed, and the question of whether she had done right today or whether she had done right the first time this morning with her clipboard and her by-the-book certainty and her order to step back. Both questions had the same answer. She hadn't. But now she had. The cost of getting it right. The formal meeting convened in the base commander's conference room at 15:30, which was 90 minutes after Vance had walked back through the service gate and taken a seat in the VIP area to complete the remaining ceremony obligations. And during those 90 minutes, Diana had performed the following tasks in this order. Confirmed all civilian attendees had completed exit from the event space, completed her zone clearance documentation, filed an incident addendum to her event report, noting the documentation irregularity in the visitor correspondence system, and stood for 4 minutes in the single-occupancy restroom near the security coordination station, looking at her own face in the mirror. She looked like herself. That was both expected and, in the way of small recognitions, slightly surprising. She dried her hands, straightened her uniform, and went to the meeting. The conference room held 7 people. General Vance at the head of the table, his aide beside him with a laptop and 2 legal pads, Colonel Breyer to the left of center, alone, which was already information, Major Tillman, who had been called in on account of the correspondence records, Sergeant Pratt, who had been with Diana at the Marker 7 situation and was present as a secondary witness, and Diana herself, to the right of center, with her documentation copies in a folder on the table in front of her. The 7th person was a JAG officer, which was Colonel Josephine Harwell, who had arrived at the base within the hour, which told Diana that Vance had made a call during those 90 minutes, and that the call had been answered with the specific urgency that 4 stars command. Breyer was not using the face he had used in public. In public, he had worn the face of a man fronting a situation he intended to manage. In this room, with a JAG officer present and Vance at the head of the table, the management strategy had shifted. He was still controlled. He was still Weston Breyer, 30 years of military bearing silver hair, every ribbon in place. But the surface was different. It was the difference between a man performing authority and a man sitting inside it while the weather changes. Vance opened without preamble. We're here to address 2 matters. The first is the handling of a formal visitor access request filed under the name Marcus James Hale, retired Lieutenant Colonel, USAF. The second is the broader question of Colonel Breyer's role in the administrative separation of Lieutenant Colonel Hale from active service 14 months ago, and whether that separation process was conducted in accordance with regulatory standards. He looked at Harwell. Colonel Harwell is present to advise on legal and regulatory process. She is not conducting a formal inquiry at this time. She is here to ensure this conversation is conducted correctly. Harwell nodded once. She had a yellow legal pad, and she had already written something on it. Vance looked at Breyer. "Colonel, I want to hear from you first, and I want to hear it without the word error." Breyer was silent for a moment. It was the first time Diana had seen him take a full moment before he spoke. "The access request was received by my office," he said. "I reviewed it personally. I made the decision not to process it." He paused. A lawyer might have argued that a pause here was strategic, giving the room a chance to settle into the fact that he was not denying it, which has its own kind of management to it. "I made that decision based on my assessment of the security profile of the event. General Vance's presence at Andrews represents a significant protection requirement. Given Lieutenant Colonel Hale's history of advocacy regarding internal military conduct, he filed a witness statement in an internal investigation," Vance said. 7 years ago. "He filed statements that were adverse to senior officers," Breyer said. "In a high-profile event with significant attendance and a 4-star principal I assessed." "What was the nature of that investigation?" Harwell asked. Her voice was mild and precise, the voice of a person who has trained the affect out of important questions so that only the question remains. Breyer's jaw moved. "It was a conduct review of a senior officer. I was a named party in the investigation." Harwell wrote something. "Were you cleared in that investigation?" Vance asked. "I was not formally sanctioned," Breyer said. "That's not what I asked," Vance said. The room was very quiet. Breyer said carefully, "The investigation was concluded without formal action." "And Lieutenant Colonel Hale's testimony in that investigation," Vance said. "Was it material to the findings?" Breyer looked at the table. "I don't have access to the full record of the findings." "I do," Harwell said. "I pulled it this afternoon." She did not look up from her legal pad when she said this. Lieutenant Colonel Hale's testimony was assessed by the investigating officer as the most substantive first-hand account in the file. The investigation concluded without formal sanctions due to insufficient documentary corroborating evidence at the time. She turned a page. Lieutenant Colonel Hale was separated from active service 8 months after the conclusion of that investigation. The separation was characterized as voluntary early retirement. "It wasn't voluntary," Diana said. Every head in the room turned to her. She had not planned to say it. She had planned to speak when she was asked to speak, because that was the protocol, and she had intended to adhere to it. But it came out anyway, the way true things sometimes do when you are sitting in a room where the weight of them becomes too much to contain. She said it again, levelly. "It wasn't voluntary. He told me earlier today during a welfare check on the civilian viewing area that he was separated under pressure following the investigation. He didn't characterize it in those words, but he described the separation as something that happened to him, not a choice he made. And the way he described coming here today, the reason he came in civilian clothes without identifying himself, was consistent with a man who was pushed out of something and has spent the time since then rebuilding from outside it." Breyer said, "Captain, you're describing a conversation with a civilian day visitor who has no standing in this." "Lieutenant Colonel Hale," Vance said, "has standing anywhere I extend it." "And I am extending it." He looked at Diana. "Go ahead, Captain." She looked at Breyer. She thought about the moment at the fence when he'd said, "Enjoy the show from out here." Marcus, light and cold and completely certain. She thought about the 7-year-old girl pressing her face to the chain link. The visitor correspondence log shows that Colonel Breyer manually confirmed receipt of the access request. That's not automated. That requires an action. He knew the request was there. The decision not to process it wasn't an oversight. She kept her voice even. "I also want to state for the record that when I contacted Colonel Breyer this morning, after finding Lieutenant Colonel Hale's name in the personnel database, he confirmed that there was no invitation, no prior connection relevant to today, and that I should treat the subject as general public. That was not truthful, sir. He knew exactly who Marcus Hale was, and he knew the request existed, and he told me none of it." She put her hands flat on the table. "I followed that directive," she said. I removed a decorated combat officer from a flight line he had earned the right to stand on, in front of his daughter, because I followed an order without asking the question I should have asked. She looked at Vance, not Briar, because this part was not for Briar. That's on me. That's a failure I own. I should have asked why a classified military file was returning on a civilian day pass name, and I should have asked my commanding officer directly whether there was history between him and that individual. I didn't. I filed it and moved on. She paused. I won't do that again. Harwell was writing quickly. Vance looked at her for a long moment. You corrected it, he said. When I had enough information, Diana said. I should have had it sooner. Yes, Vance said. But you corrected it when the cost of correcting it was significant, and you did it in front of witnesses, and you gave the documentation to me rather than sitting on it. That matters. He looked at Briar. What you did, he said, and his voice had changed, not louder, but with the particular weight of authority applied without cushion, was use your position to suppress the recognition of a man who risked his life for this country, and who had the integrity to tell the truth about what he saw in this branch, in a system that punished him for it. You kept his daughter off this flight line. You wasted 14 months of his life in which he should have been recognized and wasn't, because you were afraid of what the truth might cost you when it finally came out. He paused. I am going to find out what the truth costs you, Colonel. I promise you that. Briar said nothing. His face was controlled. It was the most honest thing he had done all day. The meeting ran until 16:45. Diana gave her full account, answered Harwell's questions, which were precise and comprehensive, and made Diana feel briefly that she was being examined by a person who was building a structure and needed every piece correctly placed, and then waited while Tillman confirmed the correspondence log details and Pratt confirmed the Marker 7 incident timeline. When it ended, Vance stopped her in the corridor outside the conference room. Captain, he said, I want to be clear about something. She faced him. Sir? What you did today is going to go into a formal record. The fact that you initially followed Colonel Briar's directive after being misdirected will be part of that record. The fact that you corrected it will be a larger part of it. He looked at her directly. You're going to get some review from this, likely uncomfortable. But I want you to know that what I observed today, not just the documentation, but the decision you made and the way you made it, is the kind of judgment I wish was more common in this branch. He paused. You have a strong record. I have a by-the-book record, Diana said carefully. Today I learned that's not the same thing. Vance made the brief, genuine sound again, the one she'd heard him make with Marcus, the sound of a person who has met unexpected clarity in an unexpected place. It can be, he said, if the book is right. He nodded once. Good work, Captain. He walked away. Diana stood in the corridor for a moment. She thought, I don't know if my career survives this. She thought, I did the right thing. She thought. Those two thoughts are going to have to coexist for a while. She put her clipboard under her arm and walked toward the exit. She found them at the main gate. It was 16:58, and the event had been over for hours, and most of the civilian visitors had been cleared out before 1500. She had assumed Marcus and Lily were long gone, were in a car somewhere, were home. She had no reason to go to the main gate. The main gate was not on her exit route. She went to the main gate. They were sitting on the bench to the right of the visitor processing booth. Lily, asleep against her father's arm with her yellow coat pulled up around her ears, and her small face tipped sideways, mouth slightly open, completely unconscious in the total way of a child who has used up every available unit of energy and simply stopped. Marcus was sitting beside her with his arm around her shoulders and his head tilted back against the wall, and for a moment he looked like he was asleep too. But when Diana was 8 feet away, he straightened and looked at her without surprise. She stopped a few feet from the bench. I thought you'd be gone, she said. She fell asleep before I got to the parking lot, he said. I brought her back inside where it was warmer. Diana looked at Lily. The small face was slack and peaceful. A strand of dark hair had fallen across her cheek, and Marcus reached over without looking and moved it. "How did it go?" he asked. "Long," Diana said. "Complicated." She paused. "Breyer is going to face a formal review. Possibly more, depending on what the JAG office finds when they go back through the separation records." He nodded. "I want you to know," Diana said, "that I told them the separation wasn't voluntary. Based on what you said to me this afternoon. I want you to know because you should have been asked, and you weren't, and I spoke without asking your permission first." She looked at him directly. "I'm sorry for that." He looked at her with that quiet she had been trying to classify all day and had not quite managed. "You told the truth," he said. "That's not something you need to apologize for. I should have confirmed with you first." "Maybe," he said, "but you did it the way you do everything. You weighed it and you decided, and you said it because it was right." He paused. "That's not a criticism." Diana looked at her hands. She was still holding the clipboard. She put it under her arm. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. This morning, when I asked you to step back, you didn't say anything. You didn't explain, you didn't push back. You just took Lily and went to the fence." She looked at him. "You could have told me who you were. You could have shown me something, some kind of documentation of your service. It would have taken 30 seconds and you'd have been on the flight line." He was quiet. "Why didn't you?" she said. Marcus looked at Lily, who was still deeply, peacefully asleep. He was quiet long enough that Diana thought he might not answer. And then he said, "When I left the service, I made a decision. I decided I wasn't going to use what I did out there as currency. I wasn't going to trade on it to get through doors or around barriers or past people who were just doing their jobs." He shifted slightly so that Lily's weight was better supported against his arm. "I flew because it was necessary, not to earn a pass for the rest of my life." He looked at Diana, and I didn't want Lily to see me use it that way. I wanted her to see her father treat someone with respect, even when the situation was unfair. I wanted her to see that being right doesn't mean you have to be loud about it. Diana thought about that. She thought about it for long enough that the visitor processing booth behind her clicked through a rotation of its interior lights, switching to evening mode. "That's a harder lesson to teach than the other one," she said. "Which other one?" "That you can demand the respect you've earned." "That's easy to teach," Marcus said. "It's just loud." He looked at her sideways, and the thing she had seen briefly in his expression earlier, the warmth, the wry quality, the beginning of something, was there again. And this time was not as brief. Today she got to see both. She got to see the father who stepped back quietly, and she got to see what happens when someone else decides to do the loud part. Diana looked at him. That someone else got a stern talking to from her commanding officer about it, Diana said. He made a sound. A small sound, but genuine. Was it a terrible talking to? More of a calibrated talking to, the kind that is technically critical but actually not. She paused. "I think I'm going to be all right." "I think you are too," he said. He said it simply, without decoration. They were quiet for a moment. The gate building was warm, and the evening had come up quickly outside the sky, beyond the glass, going from gray to the specific dark blue of late November at 4 in the afternoon. Lily made a small sound in her sleep and settled more firmly against Marcus's arm. "She said something to me this afternoon," Diana said. "At the fence. She said I looked like I was still deciding." "She says things like that," Marcus said. "She was right. She usually is." Diana looked at the sleeping child. She thought about what she had been deciding, and what she had decided, and what it had cost, and whether the balance was what she expected. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm glad you came today. Both of you." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She is going to be devastated that she missed the debrief." Diana surprised herself. She laughed. It was brief and genuine, the kind that doesn't ask permission, and it made Marcus's expression shift into the full version of what she had been seeing pieces of all day. A real smile. Not performed, not deployed, just there. "Next year," he said, "we'll bring better binoculars." "Next year," Diana said, "you'll have a credential." He looked at her. "I'll personally make sure of it," she said. He held her gaze for a moment in the warm quiet of the gate building with his sleeping daughter between them, and then he nodded once, the same nod she had seen the old veteran give him from across the civilian viewing area. The nod that requires no introduction, that belongs to people who have reached an understanding. "Thank you," he said. Diana nodded back. She picked up her clipboard. She walked to the door and pushed it open and stepped out into the cold November dark, and behind her the gate building was warm and lit, and she did not look back, because looking back was not on her checklist, and some things are better left in the right direction. In the weeks that followed, the formal review convened under Colonel Harwell's office produced a finding that the access request had been deliberately suppressed, and that the suppression was connected to a pattern of administrative actions taken against Lieutenant Colonel Hale following his testimony in the internal investigation 7 years prior. The finding was not secret. It was submitted through proper channels, which meant it moved at the pace of institutional change, which is not fast, but is, in the end, thorough. Colonel Breyer was relieved of his command at Andrews, pending the broader inquiry. The promotion to Brigadier General that had been scheduled for the following spring was suspended indefinitely. Marcus received a letter from Vance's office confirming that his official record was being reviewed for a commendation citation connected to the Coast Province mission, and that his service record would be updated to reflect the full scope of his operational contributions. The letter was 3 paragraphs, and it was correct about the facts, and it did not say everything that needed saying, which Vance addressed personally by calling Marcus on a Tuesday evening while Lily was doing homework and Marcus was making dinner. And by saying what he needed to say in the quiet, direct way, he said important things, and Marcus stood in his kitchen with the phone to his ear and did not say much, but listened the way he listened to everything, with his full attention and the specific stillness of a person who knows that some things only arrive once and should be received properly. Lily, when told that a formal recognition was coming, asked 2 questions. The first was whether she would get to wear her yellow coat. The second was whether the woman with all the ribbons would be there. Marcus told her he didn't know the answer to the second question. He called Diana 2 days later. She picked up on the 3rd ring, which was 1 ring later than she usually answered her phone, because she was in the middle of the kind of accountability review that she had expected and had been preparing for with the same methodical attention she gave everything. The review was uncomfortable as Vance had predicted, and it was also proceeding in the direction that Vance had predicted, which was toward a finding that her correction of the situation had been significant enough to factor into the overall assessment of her conduct on the day. She was going to be fine. She had known that at some level since the conference room. What she had not expected was how much less she cared about the outcome than about the process, about having gone through it honestly, about having told the truth in the room, about the fact that the by-the-book record she had spent 8 years building had turned out to matter less to her than she'd thought, and what mattered more had turned out to be something she'd only found when she stopped treating the book as a substitute for judgment. She answered. "Lily wants to know if you'll come," Marcus said. Diana looked at her phone. She looked at the accountability review paperwork on her desk. She looked at the window, which showed the November sky going into December. "Yes," she said. "She's going to ask you to explain every ribbon," he said. "I want to warn you in advance. She's very thorough." "I have documentation," Diana said. He made the small, genuine sound. "I also want to say," Diana said, "that I'm sorry. For this morning. For all of it." "You've said that." "I'm saying it again because the first time was in a professional context, and this time it's not." He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet she had learned in the space of 1 November afternoon that had lasted longer than most months to read. This was the first kind, the thinking kind. But there was something else in it now, something warmer than the thinking quiet. Something that had not been there this morning when she hadn't known him and had been deciding whether he was a problem to be managed. "We're making tamales on Saturday," he said. Lily insists they're traditional. They are not traditional. They are her interpretation of tamales, which involves approximately twice the amount of cheese any traditional recipe calls for. Diana looked at the window. "What time?" she said. He told her. She wrote it down. She put the paperwork to the side, not away, not avoided, just aside, because it would be there on Monday, and it would be handled, and it would be fine. And she sat at her desk for a moment in the quiet of her office, which was the kind of quiet that has room in it, rather than the kind that is merely empty. And she thought about a man in a gray Henley standing on the wrong side of a barrier with his daughter's hand in his, looking at aircraft with the eyes of someone who has been there and come back. And she thought about the word decided. And she thought about what it means to make the right call at the right time and the wrong call at the right time and the right call at the wrong time, and what it means, finally, to make the right call at the right time, even when you have spent the whole day finding your way to it. Outside, the December cold was coming in from the west. She had written down a time and a day. She looked at it. She did not cross it out. Marcus Hale did not go back to active service. He had not wanted to, and the wanting had not changed, and he understood himself well enough to know that the most important thing about this particular chapter of his life was not the recognition, though it mattered. It would always matter. It had mattered on Lily's face in a way he would carry for the rest of his life. But what he did with the space the recognition created. He taught. He found a program at a community college in the area that trained aviation mechanics, and he walked in one Tuesday morning and asked if they had room for an instructor with a certain background. And they did. And he started on a Thursday, and on Friday afternoon he called Lily from the parking lot, and she said, "How was it, Daddy?" And he said it was the best day of work he'd had in 14 months. She said that was good. He said it was very good. She said next time, could they bring the binoculars? He said, yes. Lily Hale, 7 years old, keeper of 3, observed category of silences, accurate reader of faces, champion of the cheese-forward tamale interpretation. Grew 2 inches between November and April, and asked her father on a Saturday morning in March whether the woman with the ribbons was going to come back. He said he thought so. She said good. She said she still had questions about the ribbons. He said Diana would probably not mind. Lily said she knew. She went back to her book. Marcus stood at the kitchen window and looked at the March sky, which was the particular pale blue of a season trying to decide whether to be winter or spring. And he stood there the way he stood everywhere, with his feet slightly apart and his hands at his sides and his face still. And he did not let himself catalog everything he had and hadn't felt over the previous months and the previous day and the previous years, because cataloging was the kind of thing that required you to sit still, and he had a tamale that needed folding and a daughter who was watching him from her book with the corner of her eye. He went back to the tamale. She went back to the book. And outside the window in the March sky, a small aircraft crossed from west to east. Nothing dramatic, just a private plane making a crossing, visible for a moment above the roofline, and then gone. Marcus did not follow it with his eyes. He did not need to. He knew what it looked like from up there, and he knew what it looked like from here. And both views were his, and he had earned both of them, and he was keeping them